People sometimes ask me if I've ever had to cross a line I swore I'd never cross. And yeah, there was one time I went to a place I never thought I'd go. It started one afternoon when my little girl came home from school. She bolted straight into my arms, trembling like a scared kitten. I could feel her tiny body shaking against me. I carried her inside, thinking she must have had a rough day, and fixed her favorite treat, French toast, just the way she liked it. In my head, I kept telling myself she probably just missed being home. But I couldn't have been more wrong. When she finally settled down, she looked at me with big, serious eyes and said, "Mommy, something happened today, and I think I'm supposed to tell you." Right then a knot formed in my stomach so tight, I could hardly breathe. She went on to explain that the school counselor had called her into his office for what he called a special game. He'd handed her a stuffed unicorn, telling her this new game was really popular with the other kids. She said she felt excited and curious, like she was being let in on a secret. But then he told her to point the unicorn between his legs and push it over and over. She described how he made strange faces, sometimes closing his eyes and leaning back as if he was somewhere else entirely. I sat there listening, horrified, a wave of nausea crashing over me. I barely made it to the bathroom before throwing up. My baby, my 7-year-old little girl, was being used like this by a man who was supposed to keep her safe. And I'd sent her right into his hands. The guilt and rage churned inside me until I felt like I was going to explode. Her dad wasn't in the picture anymore, so it was on me to protect her. I don't know why I walked into the school first instead of straight to the police, but that's what I did. And they laughed. They told me my daughter was playing a prank. They said they'd heard other jokes about the counselor and that parents needed to teach their kids not to lie. By the time I got to the police station, the school had already called ahead and painted me as some hysterical mom trying to prop up a filthy story. They didn't believe me. They didn't believe her. But I had looked into my daughter's eyes as she told me everything. I knew she was telling the truth. I felt trapped in a nightmare where nobody would help. That's when I remembered something I'd tucked away for years. I ran home and opened my jewelry safe. Inside was a note I hadn't looked at in forever. Back when I was just a green, nervous nurse, not yet a doctor, a man with a bullet wound came into the ER. He was scary looking, covered in tattoos, and no one else wanted to go near him. They sent me. I'd told myself then that everyone deserves care, so I cleaned his wound and patched him up, even cracked a joke about how he should stay out of the line of fire. When it was all over, he thanked me, handed me a scrap of paper with his number, and said, "If you ever need someone taken care of, I won't ask for a dime." That number was still in my safe. On instinct, I dialed it. I didn't expect anyone to answer, but he did. I told him who I was, and he said, "I remember you." There was a heavy pause on the line. For a second, I thought about hanging up. What I was about to do didn't fit with who I'd become as a mom, as a doctor. But at that moment, I wasn't just those things. I was a wounded parent, betrayed by the very system that's supposed to protect our kids, a system that shields monsters behind degrees and easy smiles. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low and deep. "If you called me, it wasn't for nothing." My throat locked up. I took a deep breath, forced the words out. "It's about my daughter," I began. Then I told him everything, no softening, no self-censorship. I told him how she'd come home trembling, how I'd been making French toast thinking it was just a bad day until she told me about that unicorn. I told him about the school laughing in my face, about the police looking at me like I was insane, and about the emptiness I felt now, seeing my little girl sleeping with that toy like the trauma had poisoned it. There was a long silence. Then he said, "Give me his full name. Everything you know, address, car, routine, all of it." I hesitated. "Are you sure?" "You didn't call because you were unsure," he said. "You've already decided. I'm not a cop. I'm not a lawyer. But I promise you this, he'll never touch another child again." In that moment, I realized I'd crossed a line. There was no going back. I gathered everything I knew about that man, the counselor. Names, schedules, even the color of his car, and where he went for morning walks. I wrote it all down and sent it by text. A few minutes later, he replied with just one word: Understood. I went back to my daughter's room. She was asleep, her face peaceful, as if her small body was trying to erase the worst day of her life. I sat on the floor beside her bed and cried in silence. I felt filthy for what I'd just set in motion. But at the same time, for the first time in days, I felt like I was doing something real, something that might actually protect her. The next morning I woke with my heart hammering. I went to make coffee, but my hands were shaking so badly, I dropped the mug. My phone stayed silent. Life outside carried on like nothing had happened. My daughter went off to a different school. There was no way she was ever going back to the old one. I kissed her before she left with her grandmother, then sat alone in the house with the weight of what I'd done. Late that afternoon, the phone rang. "It's done," the voice said. What does that mean? It means he'll never look at another child again. Not with his eyes, not with his heart, if he even had one. And then the line went dead. My knees buckled. I sat down and stared at the wall. That was it. It was over. But there was nothing in the papers, nothing on the radio, no headlines, just silence. I didn't dare ask for details. But part of me finally felt at peace. The next day, the principal called. Her tone was syrupy with regret. She said she was sorry about the misunderstanding, that they were reevaluating their staff, and that the counselor had requested a personal leave. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all, but instead, I just said, "Now it's too late," and hung up. But the consequences didn't wait. They started appearing almost immediately. The police came knocking again. They told me the counselor had vanished completely off the map. No trace anywhere, no cameras, no credit card activity, nothing. It was like he had just evaporated into thin air. They acted like it was a routine investigation, but I could read it in their eyes. They suspected something. They knew. Not a single shred of evidence tied me to anything, no fingerprints, no witnesses, but they knew. Sleep became a stranger. I was haunted by nightmares. Sirens blaring, police pounding on the door, my daughter staring at me, terrified. And yet, in those same dreams, I saw him trembling, crying, tasting fear for the first time, feeling what my little girl had felt. Days later, a final message came from that number. The debt has been paid. Now move forward. I stared at it for a long moment. He wasn't the first, and from what I learned, he wouldn't be the last. I deleted the message, erased the number, and burned the note I'd kept 2 years. Then I went into my daughter's room and just watched her play in silence. In that quiet moment, even knowing I had stepped into shadows, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not shame, not guilt, but a sense of having protected her. I felt alive. And if anyone dared to say it was wrong, I would have stared right back and asked, "What would you do if it were your daughter?" That question looped in my mind endlessly, while washing dishes, driving to the hospital, treating patients who trusted me without knowing how far a mother could go for justice. It wasn't just in my head that things were changing. A week after the counselor's voluntary leave, the school sent a letter to every parent, generic apologies, assurances that procedures were being reevaluated, and vague mentions of concerns about professional conduct. They tried to scrub their reputation clean, as if it had all been a clerical mistake. Pathetic. But children talk. My daughter came home that week with news from a friend. The unicorn man was gone. Other girls in different classes had cried because of him too. My blood ran cold. How many had suffered while the adults turned their faces away? I knew what I did wouldn't erase her trauma. She would have nightmares. She might one day cry in therapy, wishing I'd done more. But at least that monster wouldn't touch another child. That thought gave me strength. Still, peace is never permanent. One afternoon, picking her up from the new school, I noticed a black car parked near the gate. 2 men inside, windows dark, clearly watching me. I pretended not to notice, grabbed my daughter's hand, and went home. That night, my dreams changed. This time, I wasn't just haunted by fear, I was being judged. Not in a courtroom, not by law, but in some symbolic place. I was in a bright white room, surrounded by faces without eyes, and a voice repeated over and over. "Good done by wrong hands. Is it still sin?" I woke drenched in sweat. I went to the window. The same black car sat across the street, motionless. I grabbed my phone, snapped a photo, called the police using a disguised voice so my daughter wouldn't hear, gave them a license plate. They said they would investigate. They never called back. 2 days later, I received a summons. The police wanted me to testify about the disappearance of the counselor. They suggested he might have been a victim of retaliation or involved in criminal activity. My face went pale. I'd been careful. Maybe too careful. No traces, no evidence. Only the man from the shadows had been involved. At the station, a cold detective with hard eyes grilled me. "Any recent contact with the counselor?" she asked.
No.
"Any disagreements?" "Only what I officially reported. My daughter said he acted inappropriately, but the school found nothing concrete." "That doesn't mean it didn't happen," I said firmly. She studied me like I was a puzzle missing half the pieces. I held her gaze, my stomach twisting, but my expression stayed calm, solid. "Do you know anyone who might want to harm him?" she asked. "Probably many. If he hurt children repeatedly, enemies would naturally follow." She wrote something down and dismissed me. I left shaking, but I knew my silence had to last. That night, I locked every door, turned off the phone, and slept with a baseball bat by my side. Then came another shock. I returned home to find my daughter crying in the bathroom, clutching the unicorn plush like she wanted to destroy it. "What's wrong, my love?" I asked gently. She couldn't speak at first, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. When she finally did, the words cut deep. I remember everything. I remembered his face. I dreamed. He made me promise I wouldn't tell. That if I did, he would come at night and take you away. My heart broke in two. I knelt down, held her, breathed with her, waiting until she calmed, until the world fit back into my arms. After she slept, I went out onto the balcony and stared at the stars. I had done what I needed to do, but I wanted more. One man gone wasn't enough. The school, the principal, the people who laughed at me, they'd be next. That night, with my daughter's sobs still echoing and rage simmering beneath my skin, something inside me changed. I was no longer just a mother seeking justice. I was no longer a woman in a white coat clinging to dignity in a corrupt system. I had become something else entirely. I was the storm they tried so hard to pretend wasn't rolling in. With my laptop open on the kitchen table, I began digging, name after name, address after address, until the pattern started to take shape. I typed the principal's full name into the public records database, and one search led to another. What surfaced wasn't just her resume, but her life. Attendance at educational councils, photos from political events, columns published in the local paper. She wasn't just an educator, she was someone with deep roots and powerful connections. Pictures of her smiling next to councilmen. Articles under her byline. Speeches on educational ethics. The irony ate at me like rust. Then, buried under a decade of dust, I found what I'd been hunting for. An old complaint. 10 years earlier, the same principal had been cited for looking the other way when one of her employees behaved inappropriately. But the case had been shelved, archived for lack of evidence, the record said. Nothing in this world happens by accident. That wasn't a mistake. That was a pattern. I printed every page, clipped every screenshot, built a dossier like a detective laying out a crime scene. I added reports from mothers who had posted in private social media groups. When they saw my anonymous post, a few messaged me directly about the counselor's strange behavior. None of them had dared go public before. Most stayed silent out of fear of retaliation or shame. That's how they operated. Bury it, discredit it, crush the whistleblower. But not me. The following week, I filed a formal complaint against the school administration. I hired a lawyer who'd already sued institutions for serious moral damages. Every screenshot, every audio, every document, I handled it legally, carefully, like a surgeon opening a festering wound. The school fired back fast. A polished statement appeared in the local newspaper claiming they deeply regretted that a mother's pain had turned into unfounded attacks on the honor of dedicated professionals. Hypocrites. Soon after, I noticed eyes on me. My car got keyed. An anonymous letter showed up at my door with words cut from magazines. "You've already caused too many problems." But I didn't scare easily. If they wanted war, they'd find out they were playing with fire, and I was the kind of person willing to burn the whole thing down. One afternoon at the hospital where I worked, my boss called me in. "Everything okay at home?" she asked, her voice heavy with implication. "Why do you ask?" I shot back.
She sighed.
"We got an anonymous call saying you might be emotionally unstable. An informal complaint." I had to bite my tongue not to laugh. They were trying to break me where I was strongest, my credibility. "I'm fine," I said calmly. "And if you need proof, I'll have my psychologist write a certificate." It was a lie. I'd never been to therapy in my life. But I needed to look unshakable. The very next day, my lawyer landed a hearing with the prosecutor, a father of 3 girls, he told me. As I laid out my story, the man's eyes filled with tears. "Bring me names, bring me evidence," he said softly. "I brought everything," I replied, sliding the thick dossier across the table. He flipped through it with the careful urgency of a dad who had just recognized real danger. "I'm going to take this forward," he promised. "It may take time, but believe me, I won't file it away." When I left that building, my knees were trembling. I didn't know if he'd keep his word, but for the first time an adult in authority had looked at me without treating me like a hysterical woman or a liar. At home, my daughter was still battling her ghosts. One night, I woke to her scream. I ran into her room and found her sitting up in bed, pale and shaking, pointing at the closet.
"He was there, Mommy."
He appeared. I saw him. I pulled her close, her little hands slick with sweat. "He can't hurt you anymore," I whispered. "Never again." Deep down, I knew trauma doesn't disappear just because someone says it's over. It clings like a shadow. But guiding her through that darkness had become my mission, and every action I took out there, every name exposed, every step toward accountability, was a brick in the wall I was building to protect her. But the enemies kept multiplying. Fake account emails, veiled threats. One message read, "You want to bring down the school? You'll fall with it." I didn't delete a thing. I saved every threat. Sent it to my lawyer. He exhaled slowly. "We're bothering the right people," he said. Then the story cracked open wider. An investigative journalist reached out, saying he'd been tracking my complaint. He had sources inside the school network and told me this wasn't just about one institution. There was a long-running pattern of shielding predators. The counselor who had disappeared? He'd worked at other schools before this one. And the current principal? She'd been the one who protected another employee involved in a scandal in a neighboring city. This was bigger than I ever imagined. I wasn't fighting one bad apple. I was staring down a rotten system. But I wasn't a fragile piece anymore. I was the short circuit. And as I sat watching my daughter sleep, I made myself a promise. As long as I'm alive, no child will be silenced like mine was. That vow became my fuel and, in a way, my sentence. The days that followed were a careful dance between my job, the whispered threats, and the constant fear of being tailed. I began changing routines. Instead of picking my daughter up at school, I left her with a neighbor. I checked my mirrors. I grew suspicious of every car that slowed too close. Still, I kept moving forward. Then the journalist called again, this time whispering like someone afraid even the phone was listening. "I have a recording," he said. "Of what?" I asked, my heart thudding. "A conversation between the principal and another employee. A janitor recorded it. They're talking about controlling the narrative, about making sure the doctor, that's you, doesn't destabilize the school structure. And more. The principal even says the counselor knew too much." The words knocked the air from my chest. The man who hurt my daughter knew too much. They knew. "Can you send it to me?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "But be careful. You've stirred up a hornet's nest. More people are watching you than you realize." Listening to that recording felt like taking a punch to the ribs. The principal's voice was ice cold. "The media forgets quickly," she said. "The institution's reputation matters more than an unbalanced child." I shook with rage. This wasn't negligence. This was a decision. They had chosen to protect him. The next morning, I called my lawyer and told him to double our security measures. He advised me to leave home for a while, check into a hotel, take my daughter, and tell no one. We'll file the recordings with the prosecutor under total secrecy, he said. So that's exactly what I did. I told the hospital I needed time off for personal reasons and didn't wait for them to ask questions. I packed up my daughter and drove us to a small inn miles from the city, a quiet place hidden among trees, with a handful of rustic cabins and very few people around. I thought a change of air might ease her mind. Maybe it would ease mine, too. Maybe the world would feel lighter. But trauma travels with you. On a rainy night, she had another episode. She woke up screaming, sobbing that she heard the unicorn's noise again, that the man was going to climb through the window. I wrapped my arms around her and held her as tight as I could. I sang her favorite lullaby in a shaky whisper, promising everything would be okay. But inside I was breaking. Nothing prepares you to watch your own child wrestle nightmares that heavy inside a body that small. The next morning, an envelope appeared under our cabin door. No return address, no markings, just one page with big, jagged handwriting. You can run, but you're dragging an innocent child into the fire with you. Stop. My blood went cold. All I could think was, how did they find us here? I called the inn immediately. Nobody had seen strangers. Nobody knew anything. But someone did.
Someone was tracking me.
I told my daughter to pack her things at once, and we hit the road again, driving for nearly 3 hours before pulling into a smaller town where a doctor friend owned a country house. I called her on the way, gave her the barest explanation. She didn't hesitate, just told me to come. There, at least, I could pretend to feel safe. But even in that refuge, the tension didn't leave me. I'd wake several times each night, heart hammering at noises that were probably nothing, floorboards creaking, a branch snapping, whispers that might have been wind. I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow. Meanwhile, the prosecutor filed the first legal action against the principal using the recordings as evidence. The journalist released an article that, even with names redacted, made it obvious who the doctor was. Our quiet corner of the world blew up overnight. Some people called me unstable. Others said no one could be this brave for real. Then more mothers began to speak. One sent me an anonymous letter about her son, transferred out of the same school 2 years before. She described the same kinds of things: strange games with dolls, inappropriate touching, the child terrified of punishment if he told. I added her story to my growing mountain of evidence. It felt like building a dark puzzle, every new piece locking into a picture I wished I didn't have to see. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. The school wasn't just failing victims, it was a machine designed to silence them. And now that machine had me in its crosshairs. But something inside me, the same instinct that made me pick up the phone and call the authorities months ago, kept saying, "You can't stop now." If I backed off, every mother after me would be branded crazy before she opened her mouth. One day my daughter would be old enough to understand all of this, and she'd ask me if I'd fought for her to the end. I needed to be able to look her in the eyes and say, yes, I fought until the very last drop of strength. Still, I was wearing down. The days in that country house gave me a false sense of safety, like we were floating in a bubble away from reality. But at night the silence came back, and with it the feeling of being hunted. My daughter slept better there, maybe because the surroundings were unfamiliar, or maybe because some instinct told her she was hidden, but I felt like a cornered animal. Every ping from my phone, every car headlight at the gate made me jump. Then, one quiet afternoon, everything exploded. The journalist called again, his voice shaking. "The story's blowing up," he said. "It's on a national page now. The press is looking for names." "Is that good or bad?" I asked, my throat dry. "It's going to hurt," he said, "but it's necessary." I knew what he meant. When you throw the truth at the fan, the dirt doesn't choose where it lands. And I was about to be covered in the same mud the school had hidden for years. The next morning, my name was everywhere. Doctor denounces school abuse network. Victim's mother forces investigation into elite school. Vigilante mom or unstable. What's behind the bombshell complaint? Social media turned into a battlefield. Half the comments called me a hero, The other half called me a fraud chasing fame or money. Some accused me of planting false memories in my daughter's head. Others said no 7-year-old could recount details that vivid. My stomach churned as I read. I closed the tab. But my daughter had already seen one of the headlines on her tablet. "Mom, why are they talking about us?" she asked. "Because Mommy told the truth, sweetheart. And some people don't like hearing the truth," I said. She fell silent, then turned back to her cartoon. I went into the bathroom, leaned against the door, and cried as quietly as I could. Then, out of nowhere, a lifeline. A former teacher from the school emailed the address I'd used for my complaint and asked to meet. She'd resigned 3 years ago. We arranged a discreet cafe. She was in her 50s, with thick glasses and a serious expression, glancing over her shoulder before she even sat down. "I saw things," she began. "Many things." I suspected the counselor and the principal. There was always this strange tension between them, like she was protecting him. But I only understood when a student told me she didn't want to play the unicorn game anymore. She was crying. She was scared. I reported it to the principal. The next day I got a warning. Withdraw my complaint or my career would be destroyed. "And you?" I asked. "I resigned," she said. I stayed silent out of fear, out of cowardice until now. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were old reports, internal emails, and a memo from the administration with an extra clause. Any conduct that could damage the school's image must be immediately silenced and handled internally. That was gold. Proof the cover-up was baked into policy. I took everything to my lawyer. His eyes widened. "This is enough to open a criminal investigation against the administration," he said. That week the prosecutor, who'd believed me, got authorization. The school was officially under investigation. Search warrants were issued. For the first time, the arrogant faces of the principal and her allies appeared pale on the news. But with that victory came backlash. My bank account was hacked. A large sum was wired overseas. The police called me, hinting that maybe I was laundering money now that I had media exposure. My name was dragged through the mud for weeks. My medical license was put under review because of an anonymous complaint. I got suspended from the hospital where I worked just because of institutional caution. That was it. Just another cog in a machine trying to chew me up. Then, one night, I got a call that made me shake. "Hi, Unicorn Girl's mom," said a male voice, nasal and mocking. "I hope you're proud. You might have taken down one of us, but there are plenty more in this little game. And when the police start digging, you'll see you've messed with the spiderweb. And you know what the spider does to anyone who touches it." Then the line went dead. For the first time in a long while, I felt real fear, not just for me, but for my daughter, for my mother who was looking after her while I dealt with lawyers, journalists, and investigations. I went to the window, and in the dark, I thought I saw someone standing in the street, a shadow, perfectly still. I couldn't make out who it was, but I understood the warning. I'd gone too far. But what they didn't know was that there's no too far for a mother with fire in her eyes. If they thought I was going to back down, they hadn't seen what a woman becomes when everything she holds dear is stolen, her peace, her career, her child's innocence. I wasn't stopping. I was going to finish what I started, even if it meant doing it with my own hands. But I didn't have to. The morning after that call, I got news that hit me like an arrow to the chest. The principal had been arrested. Not directly because of me, but because the investigation uncovered something much bigger, a scheme to protect abusers within the municipal system, tangled up in fake donations, forged documents, and criminal neglect. She tried to run but was caught in a nearby city, using her sister's name at a cheap hotel. When the police arrived, she said she was on leave for her mental health. Ironic, isn't it? The same woman who mocked my daughter's pain now claimed she was traumatized. The story exploded in the papers. The journalist who had helped me published a long article filled with testimonies from former employees, students, and parents. This time, people listened because there were faces, documents, and evidence, real lives carrying trauma that couldn't be ignored. In the days that followed, messages poured in from parents. Some apologized for doubting me. Others thanked me for speaking up. One woman, whose son had taken his own life 2 years earlier, wrote that she had always suspected the school, but no one believed her. I cried reading that. I cried for all the voices silenced before mine, and for the consequences that still lingered. I stayed away from work for months, had to file a formal lawsuit to get my medical license back, and prove that the accusations of emotional instability were a setup. I won. But victory carried the weight of everything I'd lost.
My daughter started therapy.
At first, she just drew silent unicorns with sad eyes, windows with bars. But over time, she began to speak. Her psychologist told me that even though the trauma ran deep, she was healing, rebuilding herself. One day, on the way home, she looked at me and said something I'll never forget. "Mom, thank you for not pretending nothing happened." That meant more than any headline, court victory, or public recognition ever could. A year later, I got invited to speak at a medical congress on child mental health. I declined. I wasn't ready. But one day, at a bookstore, I saw my name mentioned in a book about the case. They called me the mother who set silence on fire. I smiled, not from pride, but because that woman who once dismissed my daughter's pain had become a force capable of bringing down giants. As for the man on the phone, I never heard from him again. Neither him, nor the first tattooed man I had spoken with that night, nor anyone else involved. It was as if they dissolved into thin air, a shadow of the world that lent me its darkness, so I could deliver justice, then vanished. Today, life is simpler. I moved to a smaller city. My daughter goes to a school where everyone knows her name and her story, where she can breathe. I went back to practicing medicine part-time, spending the rest of my time guiding mothers who've been through what I went through. I help with investigations, support lawyers, write articles, some published, some blocked, but all genuine. Every report, every mother who says, "No one believed me," reminds me why I'm here. The smell of those little Rainadas, my daughter's eyes, that tattooed man's phone number, it all brought me here. People call me strong, a warrior. But I know the truth. I'm just a mother who looked into her daughter's abyss and decided to jump in with her, to rip the monster out by hand. If that makes me dangerous in their eyes, good. Because mothers like me, who've lost their fear, are exactly the women these monsters should fear. If you like this story, leave a like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you won't miss the next ones. Every story here is told with courage, heart, and that touch of justice we all love to see. And if this story resonated, share it with someone who needs to hear it. If you've been through something similar, remember, you're not alone.